I've got some pretty big goals for Chapter 10. I want to have the secondary hull completely sealed up, which means have this top piece in place, which means having the nacelle pylons glued together and affixed correctly here. Make sure there's no gaps or problem. Then have the fantail in place. And then have the front locking collar and support piece glued in place. Probably will at the very least have the dorsal parts glued together, if not completely set right here. Gone ahead and drilled my wiring hole in the top of this secondary hull piece. For really maximum strength and bonding and long-term durability, I'm going to use Gorilla Glue 2-part epoxy for a lot of these real load-bearing pieces, and give them each probably 24 hours of curing time. So during a lot of that curing time, I want to maintain forward momentum, and we'll be moving to some other portions of the ship, probably going back to the upper saucer and get the impulse engine parts in place, probably move to the lower saucer and get a lot of work done on that lower planetary sensor. So big goals for engineering the engineering hull here in Chapter 10. The next crucial step as we build towards completing sealing up the secondary hull, the engineering hull, is to have wires in place before sealing together the starboard and port nacelle pylon pieces. These points right here and right here, these glue points where the pylon halves go together, is so close and so fine it is almost impossible to get any wires through there. The best wire that I have found to clear this space is wire wrapping wire. It is a fine enough wire that it can actually make it through here. So what you want to do is go ahead and identify all the wires that are going to have to make connections inside your nacelles. At the forward end of the nacelles are your spotlight points, and so we have these spots, and you may have noticed that I have a Federation approved advanced labeling system, in other words blue painter's tape and Sharpie, to identify which wiring run is for which portion. I've also identified the other end so I'll know where to connect them. We have the spots at the end of the nacelle. We have the chiller grills, which would be right in here, and the other end of this wire, the chiller grill, will go into the antenna control circuitry board. Also, as well, at the very tippy end of the nacelle is a strobe light. The other end of the strobe light will also connect to that antenna controls circuitry board that will be mounted somewhere in the saucer. So again, the best wire that I have found to try to fit in this joint is the wire wrapping wire, like for example this gauge of ribbon wire simply would not fit through there. For one thing, it has a hard time squeezing past that support pin, and then also down there at the bottom, those two portions right here of the pylons, they would never firmly go together. I've also designated just a spare line. Did this in the first build. I ended up not needing it, but I'm glad I had it there. Just a spare line in case something fails with one of these lines. It'll be good to have another line, because once these pieces are together, and certainly once you've got the top glued down, secured down for the secondary hull, it'll be impossible to get any new wires introduced into the pylons. So it's good. It's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them. One of the things also at the very end of your nacelle, there's an RCS thruster, which is a tiny little place that some builders have put amber lights, and they look really cool. I may go that route, in which case that spare line will really come in handy. So you see, with the wire wrapping wires in place for the different connecting lines, these two sections will go together really firmly. So I'm going to glue together these two portions of this pylon and run wires and glue together the other portions of the other nacelle pylon. The nacelle pylons have been glued together and have been two-part epoxied to the secondary hull. I did them one at a time. I did the starboard pylon first, clamped it, and gave it about 16 hours to cure. Then did the port pylon, again two-part epoxy, gave it, actually ended up being 24 hours to cure. There's a good solid fit, no wiggle or anything, and so I'm pleased with how they have bonded. The next step, of course, is going to be the big one, and as you will hear me say probably too often, for my money, the most stressful part of this build is securing the top of the secondary hull. I've done a few test fits, and there was a little bit of an issue in here, so I went back, further modified these locking pins, cut even more out of them, and that actually went a long way towards getting this section to fit better. There's still some gappage that is appearing here and here, here and here after I get them together, but you know, that's what plastic putty is all about. Now, in his Sprueverse series, in chapter 4 of his first 1-350 series build, at about the 5.5 minute mark, Phil, again with Sprueverse, talks about all of this in here and talks about some of the fit problems here. And he actually used a different method of attaching the pylons and attaching the top of the secondary hull. He did not glue his pylons together. He did 1/2 and 1/2 on the secondary hull bottom, and then did 1/2 and 1/2 on the secondary hull top before gluing them down. Obviously, that's not the method that I used, but it's worth going again to his first 1-350 build series, chapter 4, at about the 5.5 minute mark, and see some of what he details as problems right here that potentially could occur. And it's what I believe happened in my first build, which is why I had problems with the rear of the secondary hull going together. Not having that problem this time, which is just really one of the odd things about this kit, where it decides to fight you. Sometimes things work, sometimes things don't. Sometimes things will go together right up into the part that you need them to the most, such as when you apply glue, and then they stop. Anyway, I've done I've done 2 test fits so far. I don't want to do too many. I don't want to manhandle this thing too much and risk breaking something or knocking loose any of these lights and wires. Speaking of lights and wires, I've been very careful to do my runs so that none of the wires will interfere with the top piece gluing down. I've also tried to be very careful that nothing runs over the top of these light bars, because I don't want to risk casting shadows down into the shuttle bay. I then, just because I'm paranoid about these things, did a final lighting test, connected a 9-volt battery to every single connection to make sure all of the lights come on, everything is working, and then even did a connection. I hung a light, an LED, off of the spare line that runs up through the pylon and connected that. So that came on. So as far as I can tell, everything is wired the way that it needs to be, and everything is working So I'm going to use Gorilla Glue 2-part epoxy because so much of this is load bearing. I believe in my first build I went with styrene plastic, which is why I may have this occurring. So I want as strong a bond as possible. I want as permanent a bond as possible, which is why I'm going with a 2-part epoxy. So this will be my final test fit, dry fit of the upper portion of the secondary hull to the lower portion prior to gluing everything together and then clamping it. This really is, for my money, the most stressful part of this build. This entire assembly here, as I have mentioned, just really was not well designed, and these parts, even with modifications like trimming the nacelle tabs, just don't want to go together well. I'm getting a good enough fit on the forward section here. There's no way that I can eliminate this gap here. The rear section here will lay down, so I'm going to use these clamps. I've got 4 of them, may only use 3, and I'm going to start at the front and work my way back, and perhaps even use these smaller clamps to tighten up right here and right here. So the top piece has been epoxied and clamped down for a little more than 24 hours. Just getting home from work. This is really all I've been thinking about all day. Can't wait to take the clamps off and take this locking binder off to see how everything has come together. I got these clamps the other day really just for this purpose, but as it turns out, they're probably not the best thing, and which I really didn't realize until I had slathered it all down with 2-part epoxy, and you really only have a few minutes after that to get everything together. Problem is they are not quite adjustable enough, and they kind of click portion by portion by portion, and I got to the point that I was afraid if I applied any more pressure to click to the next notch that I might end up cracking that styrene hull. Still, they have held good enough, so let's take a look at how everything came out. This is the method that I used in my first build. These zip ties, they work really great around this forward portion of the hull because you've got pretty much a full circle. They, however, don't work as good back here because of this curved portion. But and they can be the slightest bit tricky getting off. There. So well, we've got a good firm bond on everything. There are, of course, these big gaps here and here, which I don't particularly like. Not as bad here and here on your starboard side, but that's what plastic putty is all about. This is a good firm fit. This is good and firm. Like I've said before, on my first build, these 2 parts would not go together. There's about an 1/8 of an inch gap. and I actually had to just glue it as close as I could and do a lot of puttying to get that fixed. So I'm very happy that all this came out sealed as tightly as it did. So I've got the top piece permanently bonded with 2-part epoxy. Gave it about 48 hours to cure. Once I was sure that it was permanently bonded, then went back in and put in the fantail, again with 2-part epoxy. The fantail is an interesting piece to try to clamp because it's such an odd shape. So what I ended up doing was using just long rubber bands to hold it permanently in place, and gave it about 36 hours to cure. Then hand twisted the power source to my interior lights. One, I wanted to see how cool they look. Also, I wanted to look for some light leaks, and of course found some. I found a few little streams of light coming out through this seal right here, a few on your fantail. I also found some ghosting that was taking place along the top near the base of the port nacelle pylon. So I actually had to come back in with some tulip and retulip that area, retulip a few other areas where I found some ghosting, and then came back and gave it a little bit of a coat of Liquitex white. That will hopefully mean that I won't have to hit this thing with too many additional coats of the Tamiya fine white primer to get it back up to a good white look. But on the whole, I'm pretty pleased with the way a lot of this looks, with the way a lot of it is lit up. The next step is going to be this, the locking collar, which will go here to the front. So the locking collar, and we'll take the deflector dish housing off, seals along in here, and this piece, more than any other piece in the entire kit, for my money, is probably the most load-bearing piece, because this is where the mounting pin goes. So all of the weight of the ship, the secondary hull, the dorsal, the nacelles, the saucer, which is an enormous heavy piece in and of itself, all is hitting right along here, along the top of this locking collar, and then along these side pieces. So I definitely am going to use 2-part epoxy for that. Now, in all fairness, I haven't had any problems with my first build cracking loose, and in all of the forums and Facebook build groups I've seen, I haven't seen anyone report that they have had problems with these pieces coming apart and this, cracking apart. So, but it's something that of course, you really don't want to take place. So again, I'm going to use the 2-part epoxy to secure it. We'll have to feed a lot of all this wiring through here. The next step will be the dorsal. I've glued the 2 dorsal pieces together. In my first build, I had a little bit of a light leak coming through this back piece. So what I've done is I've gone through on the inside with some tulip along the front and along the back on the insides, to really try to make sure that there's no light that comes through this glue seam. And then just to make sure, I've gone and I've sanded these pins to do a test fit so they would fit here. Once the locking collar is in place, then I will feed these wires up through the dorsal. There's also going to be some wires eventually coming down from the saucer that are run down through the dorsal, through this hole. So that takes a little bit of fishing of wire, because there's going to be a lot of connections made right here in the front of the secondary hull for all your static lighting, all your window lighting, and some of your spotlights and things like that. All of this wiring is going to be for the lights that hook into the antenna controls circuitry board, your sequence lighting, your navigation lights, your strobe lights, and the warp core lights that power up the chiller grills inside the nacelles. Once the dorsal is in place, the locking collar is in place, then you really get to a really great part of this kit where you can put the ship, the hull, onto the stand. It makes it a lot easier to work on it, but that takes us to the next portion, which is going to be working on the base. Now the kit comes with this solid steel bar that mounts here, and then again, like I said, here into the locking collar. However, this really does not facilitate any type of wire management for your lighting. So there are several different places, probably even your local hardware store, where you can get just the same equal size, equal diameter metal tubing. I'll eventually paint this black, but it'll go in place so that the wires can run up, or maybe in some cases wires run from the secondary hull back down into your power sources for the base. The base is going to be the next big thing I tackle, really to make sure that all the wiring is in place. So the next step, let's mix up some 2-part epoxy and get the locking collar in place. So this is one of those big major turning point portions of the build, when the top of the secondary hull is finally sealed up, and of course that means that your nacelle pylons are in place, and the mounting collar has been affixed, and then once that is in place and cured, then the dorsal neck is glued down. I know that I've made kind of a big deal about this mounting collar along in here, but it really carries so much weight. The saucer, once it goes in place along the top of the dorsal, is a very heavy piece, and then your nacelles also hanging out the back add a lot of stress right in here, which is why I emphasize going with 2-part epoxy and curing for 30 hours. But I've done a lighting test. She lights up and looks fantastic. You've got some really great light coming from down here in the Arboretum, and all your windows are in place. There's a lot more, you can see there's a lot more sanding and puttying that's going to take place. Then I'm going to have to give it a couple good dusting coats of the Tamiya Fine White Primer, and that'll get 1 or 2 top coats of the Tamiya Pearl White. Now, one of the things that I've done to try and really ensure a permanent bond is inside in here. And again, I'm probably being a little too paranoid about this, but I just don't want this seal cracking open. In addition to using the regular glue point, which is the exterior of the mounting circle, I've gone in and added a thick bead of the epoxy, the 2-part epoxy along in here on the interior around these rims to really try to give it some added bonding. And so at this point, I'm pretty sure that this lovely lady is going to hold together. This is such a great part of the build when this beautiful ship is finally airborne. It also helps for a lot of the assembly, particularly the assembly and doing a lot of the wire work here inside this cavity, to have it up in the air to get your hands on it. So at this point, I really want to talk a little bit about this kit. I'm glad to have gotten past this really crucial part of the build, and this is, for my money, the most difficult and the most stress-inducing part of the build, and that's this entire assembly right in here, getting the top piece mounted down firmly over the pylons. And on my first build, there was a really bad lift as you get closer down to the fantail, And so one of the major reasons that I wanted to undertake this new build is to try to overcome a lot of that, to foresee those problems. Many test fits, watching many videos, and trying to use the experiences that I had on my first build to try to make sure that this piece went down as smoothly as possible. And it did go down a lot better, but it still took far more work than I intended, and it took these means these locking clamps that you saw in that photo to hold it all down in place while it cured. As of this video posting, Polar Lights is about to launch the newest version of this kit. I guess I should say the newest reissue of this kit. Comes in this fantastic looking box art. A lot of builders were hopeful that Polar Lights would have gone back in and taken care of some of the major problems of this kit, most notably this whole assembly right here, and made it a little bit smoother and a little bit easier to go together. By all accounts, the new pressing of the kit is no changes at all in place, so they're still going forward. This is just going to be a portion of the build that's going to require a lot of skill and care in engineering. Hopefully though, with the newest version, at least you're going to get new pressings of the decal sheets, so maybe those decals are not going to be so prone to cracking and breaking and drifting apart. So at this part, with this lovely lady up in the air and really looking very enterprisey, I'm going to wrap up chapter 10. For chapter 11, we are going to get into the base, because at this point there's some engineering and technical work in getting all the wiring to run to accommodate the different power flows for the tenant controls, circuitry board, as well as just the regular window lights. So look forward to seeing you. Chapter 11, Walker Street Shipyards.